The London fog in the mid-18th century was not merely a weather phenomenon, but a living, breathing entity that engulfed the city as dusk fell. It was a dense, yellowish substance, smelling of coal, river silt, and decaying refuse, in which sounds drowned and the outlines of houses dissolved, transforming familiar streets into an endless labyrinth. Imagine a gentleman, dressed in an expensive frock coat of fine cloth, who just an hour ago left a cozy salon or gambling house in the Covent Garden area. He stands on a corner, and his heart begins to beat faster not from physical exertion, but from primal fear. Around him is not a single ray of light, only a viscous, impenetrable blackness in which every rustle seems to portend trouble. He knows that somewhere here, a few steps away, there might be an open sewer manhole, a pile of filth, or, much worse, a man with a club, ready to relieve him of his purse, and perhaps his very life force. It was at this moment of despair, when a civilized man realized his utter helplessness in the face of the nocturnal elements, that a saving light appeared from the gloom. It was not a divine light, but the smoky, crackling flame of a torch, clutched in the hand of a grimy, soot-covered figure of a teenager. His voice, hoarse from inhaling smoke and dampness, cut through the silence with an offer that was impossible to refuse: to escort the noble gentleman home for a couple of pence. At this moment, the boy, whom this gentleman would not even have noticed in daylight, became the most important person in his life. He was a pilot in an ocean of darkness, the only thread connecting the traveler to the safety of his home. But in the flickering light of the torch, an intrigue lay hidden, one that many knew but preferred not to dwell on in times of need. This guide could be both a guardian angel and a harbinger of ultimate ruin. To truly understand the nature of this strange and dangerous profession, one must delve into the context of an era when night was an entirely different space than it is today. We, accustomed to the darkness being dispelled by the flick of a switch, can barely imagine cities that plunged into absolute, primeval darkness every night. Before the advent of gas lighting, major European capitals became territories of chaos after sunset. The moon was an unreliable ally, often hidden behind thick clouds or the smoke from thousands of chimneys. Streetlights were practically non-existent, and the rare oil lamps that private homeowners hung by order of the authorities gave off a dim, dying light that barely illuminated the lamp glass itself, let alone the pavement. In such an environment, sight ceased to be the primary sense, giving way to hearing and touch, and the urban space fragmented into islands of safety inside homes and an ocean of danger outside. In this ecosystem of darkness, a unique economic niche emerged, occupied by street children known as link boys or torchbearers. The word link in this context referred to a torch made of hemp rope soaked in a mixture of resin, tar, and wax. These boys were an integral part of the nocturnal landscape, living streetlights that could be hired. They crowded at the entrances to theaters, taverns, and private clubs, awaiting the exit of wealthy clients. Their service was simple and vital: to walk ahead of the customer, lighting the way, warning of potholes, puddles, and piles of rubbish, and, theoretically, deterring petty thieves by the very presence of fire. However, the economic basis of their existence was extremely precarious. The payment for their labor was pennies, often just a farthing or a halfpenny, an amount barely enough to buy a piece of bread. This created a situation of extreme imbalance. A poor, hungry teenager would guide a person through the darkness, a person whose pockets might hold more money than the boy could earn in 10 years of honest labor. The social chasm between the guide and the guided was colossal. Yet in the darkness of the alley, they found themselves bound by a single chain of dependence. The rich man depended on the boy's knowledge of the city and the light he provided, and the boy depended on the rich man's generosity. But there was also a third force, invisibly present in this equation, the criminal underworld, which always sought ways to redistribute wealth, and link boys often became the ideal tool for this redistribution. The external conflict of this profession lay in the daily physical confrontation with the environment. The link boy's work was incredibly arduous and harmful to health. Burning resin constantly dripped, scorching hands and feet, and acrid smoke corroded lungs and eyes. These children coughed constantly. Their skin was permeated with soot that was impossible to wash off in the absence of hot water and soap. Moreover, they were constantly at risk. The night city did not forgive weakness. Competition for a rich client could lead to brutal fights between the boys themselves, where not only fists, but also burning torches were used. They fought for every inch of territory near profitable locations, forming their own small hierarchies and gangs. But the greatest danger came not from competitors, but from the very nature of their activity. Being visible in the dark meant being a target. The light of the torch not only showed the gentleman the way, but also announced to everyone hiding in the shadows, "Here comes the prey!" Robbers, pickpockets, and thugs used link boys as beacons. It was not uncommon for a boy, honestly doing his job, to become an unwitting accomplice in an attack, simply because his light attracted the attention of predators. In such situations, the link boy found himself between a rock and a hard place. Protecting the client was dangerous for his own life, and fleeing meant losing earnings and reputation. However, a much deeper and more dramatic layer of this phenomenon lay in the realm of moral choice and internal conflict. Many link boys were not just passive victims of circumstances or innocent guides. Poverty is a cruel teacher, and it quickly explained to street children the simple arithmetic of survival. If an honest escort of a client across the city could earn a penny, but accidentally leading him into a dead end where accomplices awaited could earn a shilling or even a crown, then the choice for a hungry child became obvious, albeit agonizing. It was here that the dark fame of link boys was born. The scheme of betrayal was meticulously refined. The boy would lead the client with a confident stride, chatting about the weather or news, lulling his vigilance. Then, in the labyrinth of narrow alleys, where one turn resembled another, he would suddenly extinguish the torch. The abrupt onset of darkness after bright light blinded the victim more severely than if there had been no light at all. At this moment of complete disorientation, accomplices would emerge from the shadows. The boy would disappear, dissolving into the familiar nooks and crannies, leaving the client alone with his fate. Sometimes the link boy's role was even more active. He could give a conditional signal, a special whistle or a wave of fire, indicating that the client was drunk or particularly richly dressed. The inner drama of such a teenager is a plot worthy of the pen of great novelists. On the one hand, they lived with pride in their usefulness, a sense of power over the adults and powerful of this world. In moments when they led someone through the darkness, they were in charge. They knew the way. Safety depended on them. This gave an intoxicating sense of significance. On the other hand, constant fear of the law, of older criminals, and perhaps remnants of conscience created monstrous tension. After all, not every link boy was a hardened criminal from birth. Many were orphans, runaways from abuse, children thrown to the roadside of life who were simply trying not to starve. Every betrayal of a client, every collusion with robbers, probably left a mark on their soul, making them harden and close off from the world. But hunger always spoke louder than conscience. The philosophical aspect of this story touches on fundamental questions of trust and the structure of society. Link boys were a living embodiment of a paradox. To find safety, one had to trust a representative of the class that posed the greatest threat. A wealthy aristocrat, hiring a ragged boy, effectively entrusted him with his life, entering into an unspoken social contract. This was a moment of fragile balance, when social barriers crumbled in the face of a common threat: darkness. The light of the torch became a symbol of civilization, a small island of order in the chaos of the night. But this light was in the hands of those whom civilization had rejected. This situation exposed a deep dysfunction of the urban system of that time. The state practically withdrew from ensuring night safety. Police, in the modern sense, did not exist. There were night watchmen, often called Charlies, after King Charles II, who established this service. But these were, as a rule, elderly, infirm people, poorly armed and receiving meager wages. They themselves feared the darkness and criminals, preferring to sit in their booths. Their famous cries about the time and weather served more as a warning to thieves to escape than a real threat. In such conditions, private initiative in the person of link boys was the only alternative. A surrogate for law and order, a wild and unregulated market for security. The system relied on fear and necessity until a technological revolution occurred, forever changing the rhythm of urban life. The transformation began imperceptibly in the laboratories and workshops of inventors experimenting with coal gas. The name of William Murdoch and his followers became the turning point that launched the process of the disappearance of the link boy profession. When gas streetlights were first lit on Pall Mall in London at the beginning of the 19th century, it had the effect of an exploding bomb. People watched in amazement at the steady, bright flame, which required no wick and burned inside a glass globe, giving many times more light than the best oil lamp or tar torch. This was not just a technical innovation, it was the beginning of a new era, the era of controlled night. Gaslight was bright, constant, and, most importantly, impartial. It shone equally on everyone, rich and poor, honest citizens and criminals. It deprived link boys of their main asset, the monopoly on light. If darkness was once their ally and workspace, now light flooded the streets, making secret signals and ambushes impossible. Shadows receded, and with them receded the power of the street guides. The culmination of this historical process was protracted but inexorable. The introduction of gas lighting met fierce resistance from those whose businesses were tied to darkness. And it wasn't just criminals. Candle makers, whalers who supplied oil for lamps, and of course the link boys themselves saw gas lamps as a threat to their existence. Historical chronicles preserve accounts of teenagers smashing the glass globes of the first lamps, cutting gas pipes, and trying in every way to sabotage the introduction of new technology. This was a desperate war of the Luddites of illumination, an attempt to stop progress with stone and stick. But progress was inexorable. The network of gas pipes spread beneath the cobblestones like the root system of a giant tree, sprouting luminous pillars at every intersection. Simultaneously, another crucial change was taking place: the creation of a professional police force. Sir Robert Peel, the founder of the London Police, understood that light and order must go hand in hand. The new police officers, bobbies, were young, strong, disciplined men whose task was to patrol the lit streets. This double blow, bright light and the real force of law, definitively knocked the ground out from under the link boys' feet. Their services became unnecessary. Why pay a suspicious boy if the street is lit and a constable stands on the corner? The profession began to rapidly marginalize. If previously a link boy was an essential companion to a gentleman, now he transformed into an annoying beggar, offering a service that no one needed. For some time, they still existed in the most remote and poor areas, where gas pipes had not yet reached, or worked on days of particularly thick fog when the light of the lamps could not penetrate the smog. It was in the fog that they regained their power, becoming temporary kings of the situation. But these were only echoes of past glory. On clear nights they disappeared, dissolving into the new economic reality of the industrial city. Reflecting on this history, we come to understand the profound resonance it has with modernity. The story of the Link Boys is a classic example of how technology destroys entire layers of social relations and professions. It is a lesson that safety is a basic commodity for which there is always demand, and if the state cannot provide it, the market will create its own, sometimes ugly, forms of supply. Here we see a prototype of the modern gig economy, where people without guarantees or protection offer one-off services in a vulnerable position. Moreover, this story makes us ponder the meaning of light in our lives. We take lit streets for granted, forgetting that every lamp is a monument to victory over chaos, over fear, over the possibility of being attacked from the darkness. Gaslight didn't just make streets visible, it changed the psychology of the city dweller, allowing them to feel like masters of the city, not only during the day, but also at night. This was an expansion of living space, a colonization of time that allowed for the development of night culture, evening shifts in factories, and nighttime entertainment. But there is another, more sorrowful lesson. The disappearance of the link boy profession did not mean the disappearance of poverty or child homelessness. The boys who once held torches did not vanish into thin air. They flowed into other spheres of the shadow economy, or became laborers in factories where working conditions were no less appalling. Technology solved the problem of lighting, but did not solve the social problem that gave rise to link boys. The light of the lamps illuminated the destitution of the streets, made it more visible, but did not eliminate its causes. Returning in our mind's eye to that gentleman in the 18th century fog, we now see this scene differently. We understand that at the moment he handed a coin to the grimy teenager, an exchange far more complex than a simple payment for a service was taking place. It was a meeting of two worlds that, in ordinary times, tried to ignore each other. The torch in the boy's hand was a bridge between wealth and poverty, order and anarchy. Today, as we walk along a brightly lit avenue, and the light from LED lamps bathes everything around us in a cold, clinical glow, somewhere on the periphery of our consciousness, in deep genetic memory, that ancient fear of darkness still lives. And, perhaps, if you listen closely, through the noise of car tires and the hum of the metropolis, you can hear the ghostly echo of the steps of little guides, whose torches have long since gone out, but whose shadows still dance on the walls of old houses, reminding us of a time when light was a commodity that had to be bought, risking one's life. The story of the torchbearers ended, but the metaphor remains. We still seek guides in difficult situations, hoping that the one who leads us will not lead us into a dead end, and that the light at the end of the tunnel is not the reflection of a fire or a trap, but true salvation. This evolution from a living, flickering flame in the hands of an unreliable person to the cold, stable light of a machine and a system reflects the entire path of our civilization. We exchanged risk and the human factor for safety and automation. We eliminated uncertainty, but with it went that special, acute connection between people that arises only in the face of common danger. The night city became safe, predictable, and convenient, but it lost that mystical depth where adventure or doom could hide around every corner, and where a person's fate depended on how brightly the tar-soaked rope burned in the hands of an unfamiliar boy. Analyzing the decline of this profession, one cannot help but notice another important nuance: the change in the very perception of time. When darkness was absolute, night was a time of rest or secret affairs. Torchbearers were the keepers of the keys to this time. With the advent of constant illumination, night simply became an extension of day. We lost the right to darkness, the right to mystery. Everything became clear, visible, transparent. Link boys were the last guardians of that era when the city had its own secret, nocturnal life, hidden from prying eyes by a thick veil of gloom. Their disappearance marked the end of the night city's privacy. Now every step, every action could be seen. This was the first step towards a society of total surveillance, where light is used not only for safety, but also for control. It is also interesting to trace the fate of the term itself. The word link boy remained in literature and historical references, becoming a symbol of a bygone era. In the works of Dickens and other authors of the Victorian era, we encounter echoes of this time, where fog and darkness play the role of independent characters. These texts have preserved for us the atmosphere of anxiety and uncertainty that reigned in the streets. Reading them, we can smell the burning, hear the squelching of mud underfoot, and feel the sticky fear when the guide's light suddenly starts to move away too quickly, or turns into a suspiciously dark alley. Thus, the story of the Link Boys is not just a historical curiosity. It is a multi-layered drama about the coming of age of humanity, about finding a balance between freedom and safety, about the price of technological progress, and about those who pay that price. It is a reminder that any light casts shadows, and in those shadows, life will always exist, hidden from the eyes of the prosperous majority. And as long as social inequality and poverty exist, the essence of the phenomenon will not disappear. It will only change its form, mimicking new technologies and new conditions, but remaining essentially the same: the exploitation of the needs of some to ensure the comfort of others. Concluding this excursion into the history of the Night City, it is worth looking once more at the figure of the boy with the torch. He stands at the crossroads of eras, small, dirty, but proud of his mission. In his hand burns a fire that dispels the darkness of centuries. He does not yet know that his time is running out, that soon he will be replaced by cast-iron posts and glass lamps. He simply does his job, surviving here and now. And in this image there is something eternal, something infinitely human. The ability to carry light even when the whole world around is plunged into darkness, and the hope that this light will lead to a safe threshold. Perhaps this is why we look into this story with such interest, recognizing in it our own fears and hopes, our eternal striving to find a way through the unknown. Thus, the profession disappeared, but the memory remained. The memory of a time when trust in a stranger cost a farthing, and the price of a mistake could be equal to life. And every time the light goes out in our homes and we grope for a flashlight or a candle, we momentarily return there, to that era, becoming link boys ourselves, paving the way in the darkness, hoping that the darkness will soon recede. This is an eternal cycle of the struggle between light and shadow, in which the scenery and tools change, but the essence remains the same. Man needs light, and he will always find a way to obtain it, no matter what it costs him.